Welcome all to a interview with the illustrious Sam Barlow, creator of Immortality, coming to PlayStation on January 23rd. Sam, thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm feeling very illustrious.
Yeah, good. You
exciting to
should.
hear.
You absolutely should. I want to start with like a fun question before we get
Okay.
really into Immortality. Her story, telling lies, now immortality. All the players taking on a mystery for them to solve. What are some of your favorite mysteries in fiction?
I see. You say fun question. You mean
Oh, fair.
essay question?
Oh,
You
that's
mean
totally fair. Yeah.
it's okay. This is an interesting question. The thing that comes to mind, this is like a random one, is there's a book called The Devotion of Suspect X, which was like when it came out, had like a little bit of a buzz here. I think they've done a movie of it, and they're probably doing a bunch of TV adaptations now. But it's like when I did her story, I got really, really deep into what even is a detective story, what's a mystery story, how do they work, getting deep into, if you look at the history going from like Agatha Christie onto the modern day, there has been these key evolutions where like the Agatha Christie mysteries were like little puzzles, right? There's a locked room, there's a dead body. Poirot shows up, and he doesn't have a lot of character development, right? He is a set of tics and affectations. You go through the whole book, all sorts of clues. The idea is, can you, the reader or player, solve the mystery? And then at the very end, Poirot comes in and goes, well, here is the solution. And usually it's like too clever for you. It's like, it's like a clever solution. And then the way I get really interested in mysteries is there's this big evolution that occurs going into things like Columbo. Columbo is like the most famous version, which is it goes from being the whodunit to the howdunit. Now, in an episode of Columbo, at the start of the episode, you see who did it, right? You see who did the murder. You don't necessarily see how they like cleaned up after themselves. And then cut to Columbo shows up. And now suddenly you have this whole extra layer of dramatic irony because you have the murderer stood there sweating and Columbo's there doing his, one more thing. And so there's still a mystery around like, how did they dispose of the body? How are they, are they going to get away with it? But you have so much more of an interesting set of things going on there. And this book, The Devotion of Suspect X, is, it starts with, this isn't a spoiler, it starts with a mother and her daughter killing a guy who, I think he's like some abusive spouse or something. They kill this guy. And a master mathematician shows up and is like, oh crap, I'm going to help you get away with this murder. And he says, leave things to me. And he sets in place a plan. And then the rest of the book is the detective trying to figure out what's going on. And there's like an incredibly good twist where you're like, I don't get how his plan's going to work. How is he going to, and it's, I won't ruin it because it's really beautiful. This cool twist, which is not only a cool kind of plot twist, be like, oh man, that is such a clever solution to this puzzle, but what it does to the character and what your emotional reaction to understanding what has happened, it's just like killer. Like it's devastating. And, so that's really cool. I like mysteries that don't even have answers. There's like really famously The Big Sleep, right? Famous book. They made a fantastic movie of it with Humphrey Bogart. And the famous story is, I think like the start of The Big Sleep involves a chauffeur being killed, a car crashed, and there's a dead chauffeur in it. And that starts the mystery off, right? And then all sorts of weird stuff happens. And at one point, they're getting ready to film, and Humphrey Bogart calls up Howard Hawks. And he's like, hey, Howard, I'm just going through the script. He's like, I don't get it. I've read the whole thing. I think I understand what's going on, but like, who killed the chauffeur? It doesn't make any sense. There was no one, like, why does this dead body that starts up the whole mystery, like, who the hell killed this guy? And Howard Hawks is like, now that you mention it, I have no idea. So he gets on the phone to Raymond Chandler, the original author of the book, and he's like, "Hey, Raymond, got a bit of a problem here. Humphrey Bogart wants to know, like, who killed the chauffeur?" And Raymond Chandler's like, damn, I don't know. Just by the time he's finished writing this book and all the pieces have been shuffled around, it's like it doesn't make sense. But and then famously that was what killed Twin Peaks. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Was originally Lynch just wanted that. Like he knew the answer himself, but he didn't want that to ever get resolved. And then Bob Iger, who now runs Disney, was like, "No, man, you got to tell people."
Yeah,
that's the whole nation wants to know who killed Laura Palmer. And then they told everyone, and the show sucked.
Yeah, fair.
And so I think Bob Iger goes on the record as going, "Maybe I made the wrong call there. I don't know." But yeah, I love those kind of.
He's been saying that a lot recently.
Yeah, he's having a tough time. But I love those kind of mysteries where the mystery is an interesting thing mechanically, but it also has some kind of emotional resonance and some kind of thematic punch to it, or where you're just left thinking it over, like it's not being completely answered. Mm-hmm. That's always the good stuff.
What makes mystery and like horror work so well, like in the game format?
So here's what I love about horror specifically. What I really love about horror is, like in any piece of storytelling, you're usually dealing with metaphors and themes and ideas, right? So I don't know, you might watch a serious indie drama that is about death and mortality, right? And it's going to be lots of people sat around talking about stuff, and they might have a pot plant in the window that is slowly dying across the movie, and it like represents their fear of death or whatever. And you're like, okay, that's cool. With horror, you go, well, here's the metaphor. Right, here is the thing we're scared of. It's the freaking alien, and at some point, very quickly, you forget it's a metaphor, and it just becomes its own thing, and so it becomes really like primal and stops being quite as intellectual a thing, because you're like, yeah, the conception of the alien is all the things that we're scared of and all this weird sexual stuff. But once it becomes the alien, it's just the alien, right? It's Freddy Krueger, and and you just, I love, like, to me, that is like a way of kind of bypassing that level of conscious thought and just having people just absorb the themes and everything. So I think with horror, it gives you the permission to just treat the thing as a real thing. And in games, that can be really useful because games generally are driven by action and by an active participation and by you wanting to have intent and do things in the world. And so, if you want to explore certain themes, sometimes it's within horror, it's a lot easier because you have this thing that the player's doing and this reason for them to be interacting with everything. And similarly, like I think with the mystery, like I always describe Her Story as being a trick in that, like the hook that gets people in is, hey, this is a murder mystery. Did this woman kill her husband or not? Right? Oh, everyone gets what that's about. They want to get in there and solve this question. Now, if you play Her Story, like you can answer that question fairly conclusively pretty quickly. But then you have loads more interesting questions of like, why, how, what the hell is going on with this woman? But so there's, again, it's like this real nice mechanism for giving people a reason to be there. They know what their initial purpose is. They have this drive to solve the mystery, and they, that's their motivation. And then once they're in, then you can start to kind of, introduce them to the kind of more subtle stuff. But
to me, it's like a good mystery is a question that leads you on. It's like, okay, I want to know what's happening here, and then playing Immortality, you're entering into a scene. And a character is saying one thing, but like the light in the background is very distracting. I want to see what's going on, and I'm going to click that light, and it's going to enter me into another scene. I felt while playing Immortality, I kept on getting lost. Maybe it's just my ADHD brain going, oh, this is interesting. Oh, this is interesting. And
you're playing it the right way. That's how I play it. And then I see the people that sit and they're like, I'm just going to sit for 10 minutes and absorb. And then I'm like, no, click,
Yeah.
Exactly. Like there was never a time where like, I'm rewinding a scene all the way back. I'm just like, what like this talk show? What's up with that coffee mug? Like just like the little things that kind of keep just having those questions leading me on to another part of the story. And I got a kind of like a branching question here is, obviously, you love a good cinema, you love a good mystery and games. Where was it where you're like, I really like both of these things. I want to create something using all of it.
I think it's partly an accident. I think if you were to compress things or just look at my Wikipedia page, like, oh, this all makes sense, right? This guy started out making this interactive fiction thing, and then he did Silent Hill, and then he did Her Story. Like, there's a clear thing going on, and the reality was far more like chaotic. And I think where I got to, so like I like grew up being obsessed with cinema and paintings and novels and all sorts of stuff, but always like I get asked, especially like since Immortality came out, like there's a bunch of like cool filmmakers who reach out. They're like, "Hey, let's just chat," and then they're like, "Oh, what made you decide to do interactive rather than all the other things you could be doing?" And I'm always like, "Well, like I got a Amstrad CPC home computer when I was teeny. We had like one of the first computers in a school when I was in this little primary school. We had this very eccentric teacher." And so pretty much like from getting to the point where you're aware of cool stories and you're wanting to write your own stories, I was simultaneously like programming in BASIC and like playing video games and making my own text adventures and all this stuff. So there was never a point where I was like, oh, I should try out interactive storytelling as opposed to the other stuff I'm doing. It was always like, I'm doing all these things and interactive is always a present element. And I think for me, it's the most interesting thing. Like I feel that I do this whole spiel when I do talks where I'm like, if you look at the 20th century, super interesting time for storytelling because you essentially had broadcast media happen. So you went from, in the ye olde days, a story was like a song that you would, learn from someone else, and then you would pass along this little folk tale, or you'd tell people around the campfire, or even be a traveling troupe of theatre players. But it would always be very intimate, and there would be an element of kind of improvisation. And then we get to broadcast media, where suddenly you can transmit an episode of television or send a movie around the world, and it is like transformative in how many people can be impacted. There's a crazy stat that I love, which was in the 50s, Orson Welles did a TV version of King Lear. And more people tuned in and watched that TV performance of King Lear than had ever seen a live performance of King Lear in the entire history of humanity prior to that point. Right? So you just get, there's this sea change, right? And it creates these little cultural moments and this shared kind of cultural understanding we have. But the downside to broadcast media is it's this fixed thing, right? You make an episode of TV, it's 30 minutes long, it's done, it goes out, it can't evolve or change or react in any way. And I think what I get excited about with games is when I'm conceiving of a game, I'm thinking about that interactive element between the player and the game, right? Where things can mold themselves around the player, where things feel a little bit alive. And so it was inevitable that there's this thing I've now come up with of combining the video with the interactivity was, an interesting way to marry these two ideas. And I think it was, I've been making games for 10 something, nearly 15 years, I think, when I made Her Story. And like the best game I've made at that point was probably like Silent Hill Shattered Memories. And when I was making that game, like growing up, I was obsessed with immersive sims, that kind of exploratory 3D game. I loved like Metroid Prime, any game that would like immerse me in a kind of 3D world. And so when we made Silent Hill, it was a real love letter to that idea. It was like, how can we create the most immersive space get rid of all the load screens, reduce all the UI, just create this real immersive thing. And I had this realization in making it where I was like, this cool thing of wandering around a 3D space controlling a character, which is at this point almost essential to a video game and our idea of a story-driven video game. I'm like, this is such a prop that we rely on as storytellers, right? It's just like if you boot up Unity, give someone a flashlight and just let them walk around a foggy environment, it's already like atmospheric and immersive. So it's almost like cheating. And so when I made Her Story, I'd been working on Legacy of Kain for 3 years, and that got cancelled. And that project had been trying to take some of the ideas from Shattered Memories to a bigger budget, bigger game. And there was a constant like tension with the publisher of like, we want to do this cool, interesting idea. And they're like, yeah, but you're going to have 10 minutes of combat every 30 minutes, right? You got to still do all this fun stuff. And so when I made Her Story, I was like, I'm going to go make an indie game. And this might be the only indie game I make, right? If this doesn't work, I'll go back. So I'm going to push things as far as I can. And so one of the things I started with was I'm not going to rely on like how fun it is to walk around a 3D environment. I'm not going to rely on, there was this thing, a bugbear I had of like, when you talk about interactive narrative, people immediately think choose your own adventure and like choices and consequences. And writing in that mode was always difficult for me because immediately my brain turns the story into like a train track. And it stops feeling like a story. So I was like, okay, I'm going to make a narrative game that is not about choice and consequence. It's not actually really like usefully systemic. And that was like, very vague goal that I had. And it sort of led to me going, I'm going to make a game where it's a crime investigation game and there's someone being interviewed in a room. And it really is, what can we do that allows us to kind of hone in on this conversation and that aspect of the mystery. And it was during the research phase of that project where I found myself watching all of this footage of real life interrogations. It was like just before the true crime thing blew up, right? So this was stuff that was starting to leak out. And, I remember there was a week where I just spent the whole week watching all of the interrogation videos of Jodi Arias, who was it's a big case here in the States. And at some point, my brain just kind of, I woke up and went for a walk and my brain was like, hey, Sam, why don't you make a game that is composed of video clips, right? And put it in a database and chop it up and do all these things. And I was like, hang on a minute. Yeah, that would be cool. Cause like the big thing I had of going from this AAA game to being like, I'm going to make an indie game was at that point in my career, I got so used to working with actors doing mocap and stuff. And I was like, how do I do a narrative game without characters, right? And it's, you see Gone Home has its answer to that question. Like Everybody's Gone to the Rapture has an answer. You see all these indie games constantly having to come up with a reason why everyone's disappeared so that you can do that, right? So then I was like, well, this is great because I will have an actress, I'll have like the best mocap going because it will be real and the hair will be perfect hair physics. And it doesn't need to look good because it's supposed to be crappy police footage, right? So that was like, okay, this is a cool idea for a game. I dig it. And it was only really after I'd finished making Her Story that I kind of looked back and I was like, oh, this is definitely like plugging into my love of weird cinema and there's ways I could take this further, and then really kind of just got into this idea of like of thinking of these games as being almost kind of Metroidvania games where instead of levels you're exploring video, right? And what does it mean to explore video and scrub through footage, and what are the different interesting ways that we can ping off of bits and video clips and stuff.
Yeah, and to that point, something that I love, because I just started playing Immortality a few days ago when we got a code, and for the first time, like I stayed away from it because PlayStation is like my home where I play games, and one of my favorite things is how Immortality starts, where like here's a quick little tutorial, then you're off, and that freedom is like very freeing. Like as you said, like you're not tied to a train track. You're not like you're gonna see story beat one after the other. How difficult is that for you to like make sure that they feel comfortable in being free in searching through the game, and B, holding like the hook to yourself and not coming right out and be like, hey, when this thing happens, you're on the right track to discover something really cool. Because I don't know, Joe, if you've discovered it, but there are some scenes that like your controller will start shaking. You're like, oh, something's up. Something's up. Yeah.
I mean, this is like the thing we talk about all the time, and like we're making a 3D game at the moment that is more of a traditional character-driven game, and it's the same thing. I'm like, we got to just drop them into it because it's so funny. Like I'm not going to name names, but I just played through a whole bunch of games because I'm on one of the BAFTA juries, and there was like 2 or 3 games I hadn't played that was on the list, and one of them I got my 13-year-old to play it with me, and 10-15 minutes into the tutorial, 13-year-old is screaming at the screen, just let me play the goddamn game. Like, Jesus. And I am now so restless when I just want to get in there, right? And
time is precious. You want to get to it.
And for me, like, I love being dropped into something that you might not understand and might be overwhelming or confusing, but you are able to slowly pull this picture together. Like, I remember playing when Breath of the Wild dropped, and you'd gone from that thing of like Nintendo becoming infamous for really laborious tutorials that like treat you like an idiot, to then them just going like, boom, you're in this world, go wherever you want. And like the thing that blew me away with that game was there are lots of open world games that are like, yeah, you can go wherever you want. Oftentimes, that's boring. Again, I'm going to wander over there. There's nothing to do there. Or the open world just becomes a time killer between objective A and objective B. But what I really love about like Breath of the Wild and that kind of open world game is it promises you, the player, like follow your curiosity and you'll be rewarded. And then the game proves to you that is genuine. And I think the balance in my games, and we were very aware of this in Immortality, is you're asking a lot of players, right? You're dropping them into something. They don't quite know what the hell is happening. It's slightly overwhelming. You're putting a lot of responsibility on them to make this fun and to figure things out and to put in the time. And so what we balance that with is the game's not going to kill you, right? Like, you're not going to get a game over screen because you screwed up or didn't figure this thing out. The game is going to be generous, right? Like the thing I always forget, when people tell me that they're obsessively 100% in one of my games, I'm always like, oh, dude, you don't have to. Like, I'm like, it's fine. Like, be happy with your 86%. This is cool. Because in my mind, like, I hate 100% in games. Where I'm like, oh, now I'm just like, doing the tedious stuff. And then people remind me, yeah, but in your game, Sam, that missing 14% is all like fresh, unique stuff that might suddenly give me a whole new insight into.
It might be a really cool scene stuff, that they want to see.
So that's like the thing with my games is like it's exciting to have that much freedom, but it can also be a real, like it's an ask of the player. So we compensate by going, well, look, this is a very generous game. Like you will constantly be finding new stuff. We're not going to punish you unduly. And so really, if you just get stuck in and follow your curiosity, you are just slowly going to accumulate progress, right? You're going to slowly, this thing will come into focus and then you'll get it. And so similarly, like with that moment that occurs in Immortality specifically, or, even just generally, people would be like, well, how do you know people are going to figure the mystery out in Herstory? How do you know people are going to find this stuff? There is obviously an amount of balancing and algorithmic stuff and testing, but it is a little bit of having faith in the player, right? And similarly, like not to constantly harp back to Zelda on a Sony podcast.
No, you're allowed. You're allowed.
I remember reading the I think it's like the Edge review of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Yeah. They said that only 65 hours in did they find the beach town, right? And I'm like, oh, that's such a cool little town. And to them, that was delightful. That like 65 hours in, they're like, oh, damn, there's this whole cool place. And I think that was our thing, was what we cared about was if you get to this moment, if you have this reveal, we want it to be cool. Yeah. And you'd be like, what the fuck? Whoa.
Do you kind of get the sense, I'm sorry to cut you off, just a thought that popped in, but like, do you kind of get the sense that like maybe players are kind of wanting to be lost that like maybe AAA games, there's been a little bit too much hand holding, and maybe people just want to ask the question of what is going on, and maybe that's a good thing, because like I think of Tears of the Kingdom, of like pulling out the Master Sword this year. That was all happenstance. That wasn't something that was like golden path for me. It's something I stumbled on. I'm like, this is a core memory unlocked. Playing Baldur's
Same
Gate
as Baldur's, yeah. I
yeah,
was gonna bring
Baldur's
it up.
Gate this year. Just like there are so many times where I'm talking to coworkers who would never even try a game like this, and we're all talking about how we invaded a goblin camp. Do you feel like there's like a yearning from the player base of like, yeah, maybe being confused is okay?
Yeah, and I mean, you look at like the outlier that everyone always references, right? It's like Dark Souls, and when Dark Souls started, it was a hardcore thing, and then it's just built and built and built. And like when Elden Ring came out, we were working on Immortality, I think at the time. We were prepping to launch it, right? Because we were neck and neck in some of the awards, which was like the craziest thing. And I was seeing people play Elden Ring, and I was playing it, right? And there's like whole quest chains in that game that are pretty much impossible to figure out unless you're talking to other people and going to FAQs and getting on wikis and things. And there's just a level in that game of effort that you have to make to discover stuff. But it's cool, right? It's like this is this cool, mysterious, magical place, and there's cool shit I can discover. And when you do discover something, and it feels like that wasn't just put in your lap, you're like, oh, this is so neat. Like, and it could be a small thing, right? Like, it could be an Elden Ring. I just find some cool little nook of the world, and there's a mini little dungeon or something. I'm like, oh, this is cool. I'm just finding it. I feel, yeah. I mean, it's a weird one, right? Because I know that like I've been in presentations where bigger publishers have explained like all their market research showing how much players want to be told what to do. And like they need to have the NPC companion going, have you tried pulling the lever next to you, right? Which, again, not naming any games, but there's games I played recently where I'm like, I'm just looking at the graphics. I'm just soaking in the vibe of this room, and the NPC's like, there's a lever. I'm like, I saw the lever. I'm good. Just let me have my time, yes. have my moment. There's this huge disconnect, right? Because the games that have blown up is like Minecraft, right? Minecraft was huge, right? And you see that blow up, and then you see things like Baldur's Gate at the moment. You see Elden Ring and Dark Souls, and you see just like the weird stuff kids are creating in Roblox or whatever, just these weird and just the strange things they're getting up to on Twitch, where people are just finding really interesting ways to dig deeper into games and stuff. And you're like, there is this whole thing that is also happening in parallel to the heavily polished AAA game that is finding ways to smooth off the edges more and more. But yeah, I mean, definitely my predilection, and certainly the player that I want to cultivate, is the one that's like, yeah, I'm happy. It's, and I don't think it's a niche thing. Like, I think that was the thing with Her Story. When Her Story blew up, it was a really good time because it was like phones were happening, so there was a lot of people with phones that wouldn't normally play games, and all people would do is say to their grandparents or to their partners or whoever, like, oh, there's this thing, you should check it out. And they'd be like, what is this? And they'd be like, oh, this woman's being interviewed by the police. Did she murder her husband? They're like, oh, okay. Oh, yeah, let me have a go. And they just get into it, right? Because instantly there's a mystery. And my theory, which would always be projected by publishers, that Her Story was a real attempt to prove, and subsequently all the games have dug into this, is if you challenge the player, if you not necessarily put an obstacle in front of them, but if you create that absence of explanation, and if the questions they have to ask are interesting enough, that is the most addictive thing in the world. To see that there's a mystery and feel like you have a chance of solving it, but to be intrigued, like that is, you can't beat that. Like, I think that is why I play games. That's why I love games with puzzles and exploration and mysteries in them. So yeah, I feel like it's going to be interesting because we're working on this 3D game at the moment that is, in many ways, going, let's take some of these ideas and put them back into the third person character stuff I was doing. And I think like Immortality was a test to some extent. Like literally weeks from before launch, we had no idea how the world was going to receive it. Like,
Right.
we were like, this could be Marmite. People might, could be like, I loved her story, but what the hell is this guy on now? And the thing that I was unsure about was the wildness of immortality in that, right? But with her story, you type in a word and you get results, and there's an element of precision, and you can take your time to go through things. And like the fact with immortality that you click something and then the game takes you somewhere.
Yeah.
And it is possible to be quite intentional within that mechanic and figure out ways of being very specific about steering things. But at the same time, the point of that mechanic is to surprise you, right? And one of the things I was really interested in is, like, we know that RNG is cool in a lot of different games, right? We know that in roguelikes, randomness is cool. We know that in a Diablo game, randomness is what makes the loot fun, right? If I wasn't getting random loot, it wouldn't be that interesting. And normally in stories, it's the opposite, right? If you're playing if you're playing a choice-based game, and you make a choice because you think it's going to give you a certain outcome, if the game disregards that, it could be annoying. You're like, no, I did the moral choice, so I want to be rewarded for that. I want the peasant to remember that I saved his chicken two days ago, whatever. So the theory with immortality was like, we can put some of that liveliness and that slightly unpredictable aspect in there, because it was really like, the idea was, how do we create a game mechanic that has some of the magic of a cut in movies, right? And the magic of a cut is that you can cut from this to a completely different thing, and it creates a connection, and you can jump time and space, and it's like one of the superpowers that movies have. And so they're like, can we try and create a mechanic which does that? And that was the thing where I was like, people might not like it having that element of unpredictability, of it being slightly chaotic, but they did. They did like it, so I'm like, okay, now let's do more with that and work on it. But yeah, I just think there's so much we can do. For me, it's the freedom is the thing, but what that freedom means is it allows you to express yourself within it. I think that's expression is the thing. When I do like little presentations, I'm like, this is the word you're not expecting to hear, because these are, static story-driven games. It's not like, in Minecraft, I can express myself by building crazy shit. But for me, it's like, no, the trick with these games has been like, how can I create a story-driven game that is expressive? And the expression in these games is, this is what's interesting to me. Oh no, let me stop and think about that. Oh, I'm really interested in Carl Greenwood. Like, this guy's cool. Let's hear more about him. Oh, I have this theory about the story. I'm going to dig into that. Pitching your partner on the sofa, like, this is what the hell's going on in this story. And they're like, no, this is something else, right? Suddenly it becomes a very unique personal experience. And like the most fun I've had with these games is when we do, when we're testing them at points. We didn't with this one because of COVID, but we'll have like a focus group, and there'll be like 20 people in a room, all with the screens up, and we'll be like, start playing, and then all kick off. And then within 5, 10, 15 minutes, they're all doing different things. And they're all going different places with the story.
That's awesome.
And then after like a couple of hours, we'll break for lunch. And the cheat to these focus groups is you listen to what everyone's saying over lunch, right? And so you have all these people who've never met you before usually, and they're all having lunch. And then you listen to them, like you say, talking about things that other people haven't seen, or making connections that different people haven't seen. And suddenly it becomes so personal and so interesting. That to me is like every video game should be like that. Like, I love the games where we all have the exact same experience, right? I love the games that are linear, and we play them like, oh shit, did you do level 3 last night with the car chase? And everyone's like, yeah, that was amazing. That is totally valid, right? That is fun roller coaster. But I particularly love when you can actually go into a game and, and like you say, this year, like Tears of the Kingdom, Baldur's Gate really spoke to that, where everyone was like, coming with their own stories, having their fun little gifts of what they've done. Yeah, both my kids are playing Baldur's Gate, and like, I know one of the actors is in it, and I was like, oh, you're gonna love this character. Like, this is gonna be your favorite character. And then they got to them, and because they'd like killed a bunch of druids or done something, they get to this character, and the only dialogue from this character is them saying "fuck off," and they can't recruit them or do anything. And so then they've gone off and then they've seen like they're like, "Oh, have you met the fish people?" Whatever. And I was like, "Fish people? What the fuck? The fish people?" They're like, there's tons of fish people. But it's I think like for me, like if it's interactive, if it's supposed to be personal and expressive, like those are the kinds of experiences which really speak to me.
Yeah. I just want to, I can't not let you leave without me asking this question of how lucky are you to have Manon Gage as Marcel in your game? I heard all these things about Immortality before I played it. I heard how amazing her performance is, and then finally experiencing it, just kind of like blown away.
Yeah.
Is like, and a follow up to that really is like what goes into casting a Sam Barlow game? Like how, because to me seeing incredible people perform, to me everyone's good.
Yeah.
So how do you focus it in? Like obviously Manon's got it.
Yeah, I mean it's funny because you get to the end of it and you're too busy working to take too much in, and you get to the end and then suddenly you're like, oh wow, I dodged a bullet. Like if we hadn't had Manon, this might not have worked, right? I had the same thing with her story. I'd worked previously with Viva, and I'd written this thing, and then I got to the point where I was like, oh shit, I have to cast this, and it's a one woman thing, and if the one woman is not good, this whole game's broken. It's like, oh my god, and I remembered Viva. But yeah, with Manon, but I think there is an element that where the process does help, because so we have these great casting directors we work with, and step one is you go out to people and they go to agents and stuff and they say, oh hey, we're casting for the lead role in this video game. And at that point, some agents are like, not interested in video games, right? So you eliminate those actors. And then you get other actors go, oh no, I really want to make a video game, right? Like I'm a huge gamer, I want to make video games, or the agent is like savvy enough that this is an interesting thing they should be doing. And then I usually would meet with them and I'd pitch them like, what is the project? And we'd talk through it in a casting session. And that's the point where the actors realize what is up with the Sam Barlow game, right? Where they're like, this, I'm not going to be running around in a mocap suit shooting aliens.
Yeah.
This is 500 pages of 5 layers deep narrative. And when we talk through like, this is how we're going to film it. And often the way we film these things, it's long takes, right? It's long immersive takes. There's all these layers of what's happening in the subtext. So there are some actors who hear that and they're like, whoa, I'm going to be shooting like 10-minute scenes with all this complexity and you're going to give me 500 pages to learn. Like, that's too much for me. But then the actors who hear that and are like, I'm in, like, then already you've kind of narrowed the field down to people who have brains that work like mine, who are getting really kind of obsessive about this thing. And then we'll do more like face-to-face meetings. And I'm usually heavily, obviously the reads they do and their other work and stuff is useful, but usually it's a vibes thing. It's like, am I going to be able to spend 50 days working with this person? Are we already having a fun chat about things? Like, you know, sometimes you'll meet actors and 30 minutes into the casting that you're already just chatting about some real deep aspect of the story or the character or something. Or they're already taking notes like, oh, what was that reference? I want to go and read up on this or whatever. So that definitely helps, right? So yeah, you find, and like with Manon, it was a real interesting one because, you know, from the get-go, and before we even started writing this project, it was like, oh, it's, you know, it's a story about a film star across all these time periods who was supposed to be a great film star and something weird happened. And so already you're like, okay, this person's going to be quite important. Like, this is quite a demanding role. Who can fill this role? Right? And then when we got to the point where it was written and we were talking to the casting directors, it was like, well, there's two aspects to this character. One, we want to get across the fact that she's a young actress and she's fresh-faced at the start of the story, and she has this naivety. But at the end of the day, she's going to have to be convincing in all three of these roles and play these other layers of the story and do this other stuff, right? So it's a real ask, like trying to combine that. And so we spoke to, I think, like our short list. By the end, we had someone that had a lot more experience of movies and things. And it gets hard as well, because when you get to that kind of age range, when you're like looking at a younger actor, you either get people that are relatively inexperienced, but obviously extremely committed and might have some incredible talent and work under the belt already. And then you get like the child actors who've actually been doing this for like 10 years already and are now looking to graduate to more grown-up roles and stuff. And so we were really trying to balance between it. I think then it just came down to like a personality thing and like a vibe thing with Manon, because I think she had done, we did like for the auditions, we had them do each of the three movies. We did like a scene from each of the three movies. And then there was one like behind the scenes kind of random piece. And there were definitely, like, we definitely spoke to people where we were like, this person would be incredible in movie 3. Like if we were making movie 3 just as a movie, oh yeah, they would be great for this. Oh, this person is perfect for this role. But it was like, how do we get someone that can do all three? And yeah, Manon was great. But yeah, it's definitely the trick to casting a Sam Barlow game is there are certain actors who love the idea of a Sam Barlow game, and that luckily is the best. There's actors who are like, I love theater, I love getting that deep into a role, going out on stage, and there being no safety net, and just being present as a character for 60 minutes. And I go, don't get to do that if you do a movie. I worked with this one actor who's pretty successful, and they'd just come off a movie, and they said, I just shot a movie and it felt like I was in a video game. Like the director was like, stand here, turn to the left 20 degrees, look up, move on to the next shot, right? And it was completely controlled like that. And then they were like, now I'm filming this video game that feels like the purest theater, right? Where you're closing the door and for 20 minutes, I'm just present as a character in this scene. Yeah. So yeah, and then, so those are the people I love, where you can get into really deep conversations around the character and their motivations. And it's essential to the game, right? Like if the game is, in all of these games, if the game is, look at this person's face, what's really going on beneath what they're saying, figure out, there's so much cool stuff in these games where it's like something happened 10 minutes before this scene, what we're seeing, or something's about to happen off camera, and you're never going to see that, right? But you're going to figure it out, and it's going to be in your imagination, and that's cool. But to hint at that thing, it all comes down to the actor, right? If the actor's not putting that out, it doesn't exist. So yeah, it's a fun part.
Do you have time for one more question, Sam?
Oh yeah, go for it.
I just really quickly, I want to ask, do you have a favorite of the 3 movies in Immortality, or like time period? Like what was the one you were so excited you were finally able to do?
I think it changed from moment to moment. What I will say is, this is where we get very deep. So it was only during the shooting and making of it and talking it through with Manon where we were like, it became clear that like, oh, Marissa was happiest in the middle period. She was happiest in New York in the 70s. And I think that was partly because I was like, I'm really into the idea of New York in the 70s. And it was like, we had like, thematically, there was like this question we were asking of how do people deal with mortality, right, as human beings? And like one of the answers was religion. It was like, this idea that there is something after, and that in this life we can access it through ritual or prayer, but it's this abstracted idea. And then one of the answers was like, well, we can create things that live beyond us, right? Whether that's having children or it's writing a great novel or creating a movie or whatever. And then the middle answer, which the 70s spoke to the most, was like, one solution is to just live in the moment, is to just be happy and free and be present in the moment. And there was something about the vibe of the new cinema in the 70s of New York, and you had Warhol in the crowd, and like the way that gender and sexuality was being kind of explored and shifted. just seemed like a really fun time. And all the research we were doing into that period, it was like, oh man, this would have been cool to hang out at some of these parties. So definitely that was my period, but I bounced all around, like the three movies.
I mean, I can see why. They're all fantastic. So I can see why it's a tough choice.
Yeah.
Well, that said, I know we're running out of time, Sam. I want to thank you so much for coming aboard, talking shop with us. Tell everybody where they can find Immortality when it comes out and all that good stuff.
Yeah, it's out on the 23rd, and you can go play it on a PlayStation 5. This is the one where, like, when we came out and it was Xbox at launch, there were a bunch of people that said to me, like, dude, you messed up. This should be on PlayStation. That's where, like, all the people that love these kind of cinematic, dark story games live. And we were like, I know, but, Phil Spencer has big pockets.
I didn't want to bring that up, but, like, yeah, I bet, like, Game Pass definitely helped. I mean, you don't have to worry about, money coming in, and you have this audience that is so.
It was really weird because, like, I think Game Pass was becoming a bigger thing at that time as well. But like a lot of the initial discussion of the game was, oh, this is a Game Pass game. This is a great Game Pass game. And in some cases, that was a really cool thing because it was like, hey, you can check this thing out. It's easy to get hold of. In some cases, almost like a pejorative of like, this is a game you wouldn't want to spend money on, but it's on Game Pass, so give it a try, right? And anecdotally, if you have a game that's a bit more interesting or left field, it can help if it's up there. But yeah, definitely everyone was being like, oh, wait till you get it on PlayStation because you're going to have an audience that is really going to buy it. And I love playing it on my big TV, getting cinematic, sitting on the couch. It's such a good game to play with someone. Like all of my games, like I've tried to play co-op games sometimes with my partner, and it's always hard because usually there's someone in charge, or there's some, you're the healer or whatever, or you're doing the less fun bit, or if you're just watching someone play a normal game, right? If someone's watching me play, I don't know, Last of Us or whatever, it's like, oh, you guys do all the fun stuff. You're controlling the character. I'm just sat here. And the beauty with these games is like so much of the interactivity is talking about it, figuring stuff out, like just riffing on it. What the hell's going on? Pointing stuff out. The person sat on the couch with you can be like massively involved. And like, I have so many stories that people have told me where they were like, my partner solved her story way before I did. Like my partner was sat there being like, no, dude, listen to what she said there. That's important. I'm like, no, that's not important. That's nothing. And then an hour later, they're like, oh, damn. So it's a really fun thing. Like I say, it's a generous game, super creepy. That's like some of the best feedback I've had is just how much it creeps people out.
Oh yeah,
just
the initial. I'm like, something ain't right here. There's an emptiness to these reels,
which it was so rewarding because I know that like our original internal one pager was sort of describing the game and the vision for it, and it had this bit at the end that talked about the type of horror we wanted to hit, of like the weirdness, the unease, the something ain't right, then the kind of the realization. And then just so many people telling me about their experience with the game were essentially parroting back this description we had of
That's awesome.
This is how it it happened to me and stuff. So super excited to see people play it on PlayStation.
Awesome. Well, Sam, thank you so much for your time. And with that, let's get back to the show.